Okay, so I had the chance to go see Metamorphosis at the Old Rep Theatre. It's the first time that I've ever actually been there, and it's a play inspired by the Kafka, not Kapka, not Kappa, Franz Kafka inspired novella. It's based on his novella of the same name, The Metamorphosis. But there's a few differences, maybe. I haven't obviously read the book, I've just had a quick look at the synopsis, and there's some things that maybe it wasn't as obvious to pick up on in the portrayal, but it was a very good portrayal, and I appreciated it, and it was a very well done thing. I would say definitely recommend going. Now, my review obviously is going to maybe have some spoilers, so as I go along you might want to maybe avoid watching the rest of this if you plan on going to see it, but I definitely recommend it. They put on a good performance, all of the actors were very good, and the lead actor himself, he seemed familiar. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else, but he was definitely a familiar face and voice, so yeah. They all did very well in their portrayal of the storyline as it progressed. Now, obviously, like I said, there will be spoilers from this point forward, so if you're planning on going to see it yourself and you don't want things spoiled, I'd suggest maybe you stop watching here and just go get your tickets and go there. Anyway, as I was saying, right, so the story is the metamorphosis of maybe the individual known as Gregor. Obviously there are two people, Gregor and Greta. There are a few times in the plot where they accidentally maybe said the wrong name. Sometimes they didn't even bother trying to re-say it. Sometimes they're like, no, Greg, and they recovered it quite well. But, with two similar names, you can understand how they might accidentally say the wrong names from time to time. So there are 5 essential actors, but there were more characters throughout the entire thing. And through this portrayal, it meant that the one actor had, if you've ever seen, what's it called? Anyway, I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but he's got a white painted face with red cheeks like the bobbies in the thing where they take the joy pills. I can't remember what that's called off the top of my head right now. But anyway, yeah, so he had the painted face and the black eyes, and he portrayed the boss and some people who are buying the products, because Gregor is a travelling salesman, okay, and this is how it all starts out. So he's a travelling salesman, he's off to his job, he essentially lives in his job, so he's going there from day in, day out. He wakes up first thing in the morning, travels on the trains. Now, I'm noting some consistency between my life, and then he gets back home, he briefly has time to eat, and then he goes to bed, and then he wakes up and repeats the whole cycle. And he's been doing this for 5 years, so literally his entire life is waking up, travelling to work, doing this travelling salesman job, getting home, eating, going to sleep, and not having time for any other sort of life outside of that. And that's very relevant to the plot, which I'll explain later. Again, I'm going to go heavy spoilers because I'm going to go into subtext and things that maybe they, obviously they're intending to portray, because obviously it's a good work, but, I want to talk about these things, right? So, yeah, so he's doing all of this, and, through this, it means he has to encounter a lot of different people throughout the day, and, obviously, again, I need to go into things a bit later when the metamorphosis happens, but I'm going to refer back to this point where obviously everyone that he's coming across has the white painted face and corporate related, and so I drew assumptions based on that were incorrect, but that's only because of the painted face, and maybe if they didn't have the painted sickly face, then I wouldn't have jumped to the wrong conclusions early. But I can understand that maybe to try and mask the fact that he is playing several characters, so it's like a painted face, so it's like generic face, and maybe that's theatre speech for this person plays several roles that I didn't really know at the time, perhaps, and that would be maybe something good to point out before the show starts. It's like, this person will be portraying several roles, and that's why he's got this painted face, because otherwise, especially in this in particular, you might draw assumptions to things later on that weren't relevant. Anyway, so he's a travelling salesman. He's selling things, but he doesn't even know what they are. So, he's trying to sell all these things. Who knows if something has infected him, or it's the radiation, or what? But, he's doing this through his day-to-day life, and then he comes home to his family with his parents who are retired, and his sister who is hoping to become a singer, and, she can sing pretty well, so that's all how that's going along. So, obviously, as the story progresses, it gets further into it, where the next morning, after this, he wakes up with things on his face, skin falling off his leg, and they did this very cleverly with the transition whilst he was under the sheets, and, gets all this makeup done, so whilst he's asleep, all of this, he wakes up late for work, and then, he obviously doesn't go to his job where his job was his entire life, literally, and Mowgli street food, hello! That was a shit job. Waking up your entire life, going to work and going to sleep, and you get no time for a social life. And this person in the Kafka novel and in this play has been doing it for 5 years. So, he's literally just been working his ass off to support his family and, make sure they've got enough to live off and survive, and earning all this money for them so that, they can do all of these things and enjoy their later life, and his sister, and, all the things that will be revealed later. And, well, he gets ill from this mysterious illness. Who knows if he got radiation poisoning from some of the things he was selling, or, something infected him. Who knows? It's never truly explained. But in the synopsis for the novella, he's meant to have turned into a giant insect. Obviously, they sort of hint towards this, and there are future things towards the end where he's obviously got... He's very clever, the actor, with his physique, and he's pulling out his bones on his shoulder bones and, making them strike up so that they come and stick out quite a long way to make it look, non-human and very insectoid. So he's doing that pretty well. And that was a clever adaptation towards the end to make it look like he was fully transformed into some sort of creature. But, again, also they do go into things later where he hasn't eaten for 2 weeks, and he's getting very thin. And I know when I was in high school, and again similarities where I used to throw up for weeks on end and not be able to eat, and I couldn't even eat food, I couldn't even drink, and this guy again in the film, it's a play, was not eating the food because obviously his transformation was affecting his ability to eat, so he was struggling to eat. But again, there were also things towards the end where did he choose not to eat at all so that he ended his life? That's something I'll come back to later. But yeah, obviously when he first transforms, he starts getting a bit of a white face, there's a couple of bits on his face, and from the guy that had the white painted face, I'm just thinking, is he transforming into, one of the corporate people, But then, obviously, his boss comes along, and there's this whole scene where he doesn't want to tell people or leave his room to show that he's actually got this illness, even though he is ill. He still doesn't want to take a day off work. He still wants to go into work and be productive because that's just his goals. And then when his boss finally sees him, he's like, you need to go to a doctor. So at that point you realise, okay, he's not just transforming into one of them, one of the painted face people. No, that was just something that maybe was distracting and not intended. But anyway, from then, obviously, he goes to a doctor, and, well, the portrayal is that the doctor is completely incompetent, doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't care, he's more interested on having a competition of words on his phone, so he's trying to do word games on his phone with someone else, and not really caring about the patient, and just gives him any old pills and is like, take these, I'm sure you'll be better in a week, and doesn't really care to diagnose his illness or whatever, and just hands him any old pills, which are probably placebo pills, and do absolutely nothing. And that all goes into other things later, because there's a few times where the Doctor comes back again, but the Doctor's more interested in seeing what he's transformed into, and having a look at him and not really caring about actually trying to solve the illness or trying to cure it. And there's a few points where he comes back and obviously it gets more and more extreme, but in a comedic sort of way, so he's trying to be comedic as well, but comedically bad. So he's such a terrible Doctor, but more concerned with maybe trying to capture the creature. Or he seems to have a fly swatter as well later, which suggests again the insect thing, as though he knew that he was transforming into some sort of insect, although he expected him to be like a tiny insect. And maybe that's something again from the book, but obviously in the play it didn't necessarily come across. But still, it's a very enjoyable performance, and nonetheless, I did enjoy it without knowing anything about it, because I didn't want to look up things in advance and know things in advance, because that would completely spoil the experience. But just again, why I'm suggesting maybe go see it before reading or listening to my spoilers. So yeah, then obviously he's going through the things as he's transforming, and the metamorphosis is probably on one side suggesting his transformation into this insect, but there are more things that are metamorphosizing as you go along. So with the subtext, there's metamorphosis throughout the entire family in a variety of different ways. So obviously he ends up getting fired from his job because he's ill and he's not able to keep up his sales. And then they're like, well, you've been going through, even though it's a terrible time for sales, hashtag Brexit, hashtag the economy collapse, hashtag real life events currently. So he's like, well, the bosses, even though we understand that it's a terrible time for sales, having absolutely no sales and not really caring at all that he's got this illness and all of this, and he's trying. So he ends up getting fired, and then that's a big thing, and then that's when things start going downhill for him. So he starts becoming less and less human. But at this point also his family decides not to let him out the house. So whilst he would obviously want to work, and there's subtext of that, and his own inner monologue, which again throughout his humanity they play on a recording so that he's not actually talking it out loud. But then later when he's more exposed and they're saying he doesn't speak at all and they don't understand him, he actually starts speaking, but he's speaking his inner mind monologue. So this is his humanity speaking, but not his actual words. So whilst he is speaking on the stage, it's just his inner voice, not external as you might think and portray. So you've got to draw that sort of lines. But anyway, as he's going through this transformation, they keep him locked in his room. They're trying to look after him and make food for him, but his sister is the only one that will bring him food, and she does it, but very lightly. She gets a bit scared of him, looking at him, seeing the transformation and all of this. So but she's still caring at this point, and trying to understand and trying to look after her brother. And whilst all this is going on, the family still needs to pay for things, and obviously he was the only one supporting the family at this point. None of the rest of the family worked, so they have to then have a transformation of their own, where the dad starts to go to work, and he doesn't start to go to work initially. He starts dipping into the savings which the son had gave to him, and he kept in this lockbox. And Gregor, in his inner monologue, was happy that they're using his funds, and glad that what he had provided was actually getting used and had some purpose, and bringing back good memories from that. And there are a few different points where he's having inner monologues of his humanity in his room as well. But obviously his vision starts fading, he starts getting more ill, and he starts struggling more. But he also starts feeling like he has to be quiet, because anytime he makes a noise, they start being quiet in the other room and, try not to things. But he's still trying to listen in and be involved in the family. But, still holding on to as much of his humanity as possible. But anyway, the dad eventually starts going to work, seemingly at the job that he was already working. So, he's going to the job that the son used to work at and doing his job and going out first thing in the morning, coming back late at night. And then the dad starts complaining, what sort of life is this? I've been through all my life and now I'm retired and now I'm having to spend my entire life and I can't even spend time with my family. I can't even do this, can't even do that. I just wake up and exist only to go to work. And, that's more moaning about himself rather than appreciating the fact that Gregor was doing that for the entire family. So literally Gregor is going out every single day, unappreciated, going out, earning all the money for the family and using up his entire life to go and make sure that they got the life that they wanted without any complaints, without any purpose. He was getting 4 hours of sleep a night and literally first thing in the morning, no complaints whatsoever, doing his job the best that he could, and just hearing his dad complain about that is like, maybe you should appreciate what Gregor did for you and not just moan about the fact that you're now having to go support him and all the rest of the family. And yeah, just really appreciate what he used to do for that, because he used to buy gifts for his sister and all of this sort of stuff. And there's even more subtext later. Well, it's not even subtext, it's just stuff that's going on later, which I will talk about later. But anyway, as they go on, he decides that he doesn't want to do this job anymore, so they start to get a tenant in, and, things go from there. And there's a lot that I've skipped over in between, I don't want to entirely spoil the entire thing, but, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to address, and obviously I need to talk about these things to do that. And obviously, so they go get a tenant into a spare room, which I don't know how they even had a spare room, because obviously it's off-stage rooms, and if they had Gregor's room and the parents' room and the daughter's room and a spare room already as well, they do start moaning about the size of the house and like maybe we should get a smaller place, and but then it's like how do we get Gregor out there? Again, they've locked him in his room. Initially they do start just going in and visiting and it's not locked, but as the transformation becomes further, they do start to just lock it off. But then they decide, well, no, for his humanity we should really leave the door open as much as possible so that he can actually see us and hear us, because they decide, well, clearly he's trying and he wants to be involved. And again, there's a bit where I've actually missed out where they were starting to think, well, because he's climbing up the walls and climbing on the ceilings and not really using his furniture, even though there was a point in his inner monologue where he moved his chair to the window so that he could go and see out the window and all his old memories and that, and all his former friends and the people that he loved and fancied and, never really took chances with and all of this. But yeah, they decide they want to remove all of his furniture other than his bed, which he hides under, which is also a clever way of transitioning to get more makeup, because he would go off stage and that's when he had come back even more transformed than before. And yeah, so they were deciding they were going to move out all of his furniture, but he jumps up to try and stop them. And obviously he scares the mom. She starts having breathing problems because she's got asthma, and then there's a whole scene where he gets out of the room and then the dad comes and they start fighting and the dad almost kills him and lodges fruit in his back. And yeah, so, it's a big whole scene before the end of the first part. And then later on they show him talking about his inner monologue again, where he was saying, well, he wanted that, he didn't want them to leave the stuff because take stuff out the room, because he was using it to grasp onto the last parts of his humanity. And whilst, it would be easier for him to climb up the walls and do all his skitty stuff as the insect sort of side to him, he didn't want that. He wanted to keep the vestiges of his humanity. So he was like, no, stop, don't take my stuff out of my room. And he was grasping on as hard as he could to the last vestiges of humanity. And again, there's another scene where his sister comes in and she's trying to show him the pictures and trying to get any sort of sign that he's still in there, and he's just staring at her. But again, if he's already lost his ability to communicate, then he probably can't give her any sort of sign. But there were signs there, and even though you don't really tell. When he talks later again, he's still holding on to those vestiges of humanity. And there's a big scene at the end, which we'll get into later, where he's really doing that. But yeah, so they get this tenant in, and that's how they start supporting the thing. But the tenant's just a really terrible individual, and just being really, really horrible about the place and about the cleaning and about the smell, because obviously he has the death smell, and I know that smell from sickness, weeks of sickness on end. Yes, well, the room starts to smell, and sorry, there's nothing you can do about that. My mum moans about the smell in my room, and it's like, well, if you ever fucking took me to a doctor, like with this, if they actually took him to some sort of actual competent doctor rather than keeping him locked up in the room, then there might be a thing. But yeah, they keep him actively locked inside the room now to avoid getting out there with the tenant being in there. So he's literally locked and forced in the room. But again, even though he's now locked in the room, at all times he was under lock and key. Not actually locked, but he was herded into that room. And again, when the one time that he came out, when the door was left open for him to get out, he was beaten up by his dad. So and his sister was even saying he wasn't the same ever since. He crawled about less, and he did a lot of things less, and he was in a lot of pain and hardly moving. So yeah, it's just he was railroaded into that room. So that's very relevant to the plot later. But anyway, he's been locked in this room as the other tenant is now in the place, and essentially being bossy about the place and trying to be horrible to the dad and all that. So yeah, this is all going on, and then the tenant starts being pervy on the sister, and he wants to get romantically involved with her, and he's very interested in her. And anyway, so she's singing for the first time in ages in her room, and he demands her to come out and perform for him in the living room. So she's made to come out into the living room to perform for him, and the door is left open, and Gregor, which again, he's still holding on to his humanity, and one of his actual things was that he was working that job to pay for his sister to go to the conservatoire, the famous acting, dancing, singing, whatever school, and it's an expensive place that he was going to be saving up and paying for her to go to, and he got her this fancy bracelet, but he never told her this. But at this point again, he's remembering how much he enjoyed her singing and how proud he was of her and how he wanted to pay for her to go to this singing school and make sure she was a success. And that's why he was working this really horrible job that he didn't like, and just working all the hours of the day to do that. But anyway, so his room's accidentally been left open, and because he wants to hear better, he crawls out, and he's very careful at crawling out. And again, like I said, the actor was very good at portraying the insectoid sort of nature, and with his whatever they're called, the shoulder blades, just sticking them out a long way to make him look very insectoid and transformed at this point. But he's creeping out very carefully and very cautiously, like some sort of creature, and then he's out into the middle of the living room just to pay attention and listen to her singing and enjoy the performance, just because that was something that was very special and dear to him. But obviously the tenant notices and points out to the parents, and then it all goes off, and the daughter, the sister, obviously she's not his daughter, but the dad's daughter, but his sister decides to really have a go at him. And there was a point where obviously she was the last sign of trying to find any sort of humanity, and there was even a point where she was saying, well, we should just kill him. And that's a big transformation that happened with her, from caring for him and trying to look after him to him being a burden and her wanting to get rid of him. And even though he's been nothing but supportive, and his entire life was devoted to essentially trying to fund her to be a success with her singing. And yeah, so at this point, she starts complaining to him and shouting to him. It's like, well, it's an it now. She's not referring to him anymore because she doesn't believe that there's anything left of her brother. And she says, if there was anything left of him, then he would have left by now. He would have known that he was being a burden to us and, causing all of these problems for us. And he would have ran away and left or, killed himself. And, well, you can't really suggest that when you've kept him locked in his room. If you'd have gave him any opportunity to get out the house and, do other things and get out, I'm sure he would have left if he had have been provided the opportunity. But he's been locked in his room and, he's clearly going skittish about it, climbing up the walls, crawling up the walls, just getting completely cabin fever, especially for an animal, that's big animalistic signs of wanting to get out somewhere, but they've literally left him locked in this room, and then they start accusing him like, if he would have been any part of him left, then he would have left. And the tenant's like, well, I'm going to be leaving at this point, and demanding that he would not be paying, and threatening that they should pay him or something for having stayed there. So that sort of thing. But he's then, well, I will be leaving tomorrow. And then that night goes on, and there's clever ways they do the time transitioning with noises and sounds like a Silent Hill sort of thing. But there's one point where they maybe should have done a time transition but didn't do it, so they might have just forgot to play it at that point. But yeah, that was very cleverly done of portraying time passing. Obviously time didn't pass at this point, it was just one night because obviously the tenant was still there. And so the next morning they're throwing trash into his room, they're just storing all of the trash in there and throwing it all over him. And there were points where he was also saying that before, so whilst this is just happening again the next night, it's not the first time that they've thrown all the garbage that the tenant didn't want in the house. So, there were all the furniture bits that the tenant didn't want there, and there literal bags of trash thrown in his room because it was just used as a storage room of what the tenant that was paying to be there didn't want in the situation. But yeah, the next day they discover that he's dead because the daughter throws a trash bag accidentally on him and he doesn't move. And so, she calls everyone in, they discover that he's died and things. We'll go into that in a bit. But yeah, they discover that he is dead, but she also suggests like she knew that it was coming. She's like how thin he is, and he hasn't actually touched his food for 2 weeks at all. He's literally ate nothing. And that point maybe says to me, is it that he couldn't eat, or was he actively starving himself to die as his only way out of the situation? That's something that you have to ask yourself as well, because if the sister knew that he wasn't even eating at all, and she knew literally that nothing had been eaten for 2 weeks, then was he doing that deliberately to kill himself? And if so, then surely she would have knew the night before that actually there was a part of him in there still that was trying to get out the situation, because that was his only escape, was death. They wouldn't let him out in any other way. They wouldn't take him to any sort of proper doctor. The only doctor that ever came around was the completely incompetent doctor that was more interested in seeing what was happening and, being amused by the transformation that was occurring. But yeah, so they all knew that he wasn't eating and looking after himself, but the daughter doesn't seem to care at that point. It's like, at this point it's all done. They're more happy that he's dead, and then the daughter's, well, great, now we can actually go to a small house and, not have this big burden upon us, and we'll be we'll have more finances because with a smaller place we'll have lower overheads and we'll have more to spend and we'll be able to live a happier life and all of this. And that's just very cold, especially when he's literally spent his entire life to making sure that they have everything they need to have a good life, and until this transformation happens, which obviously screwed things over. And it's just a big metamorphosis on their behalf as well. So they've had a big transformation from being family to just being completely cold, and he's just a monster to them that's now dead on the floor, and that they're free of. They're free of this burden now, and they're able to move on and go elsewhere and just live their lives. And I just found the ending very, very cold. That they did not remotely care at all, and he had literally given up his entire life for them, because who knows what caused his transformation. But if his job caused his transformation into this insect creature, then it's because of working this job to pay for their life and to pay for her to go to the conservatoire, to learn to be a great singer, to be a great success in life, and to make sure that his parents didn't have to work, to enjoy their retirement, and for the medical for his mother with her asthma and all of this. And he literally did everything for them. His entire life was for them, and that they there was a degree of caring whilst he was going through this transformation, but for the most part, they just really, it really was that they were being quite horrible about it. When he was going through his transformation, they were quite cold. They weren't as caring as, you'd expect parents to be, or relations to be, but, I can understand, with shit parents and family myself, that, not everyone's family is great, and not everyone's family is perfect. Especially with the taking everything out of his room, it's like taking all of his humanity away. But he wanted to stop that, and then because he wanted to stop that, he got attacked. But yeah, I mean, that's all going towards it being a good play, and maybe a good novel as well. It's very well designed, it's very well acted out, and like I said, all the actors portrayed their roles very well and did the play justice. So I would definitely recommend going to see it. And obviously, the ending is quite an emotional one, but I was more on the side of the monster, and I felt, how could they be so cold in the end? But who knows how long they'd been through that of him transitioning into this creature. But they could have done stuff to help him. They could have tried to release him, or not just keep him hostage and tied. He's not tied up, but metaphorically tied up in this room and just stuck in there, unable to have any sort of life. Sure, what sort of life would he have as an insect? But, at least he would be free, and, maybe they could have sought out better medical help for him. Because even when he was sick, he still wanted to go to work. He still wanted to try and support them. And, he did that as much as he could until the illness really took him over. And, that just speaks a lot for his character. And obviously, like I said, the actor portrays it all very well. And the transformation into this insect creature as well, he portrayed that very well. And all the actors were actually pretty good. So it's definitely a recommended thing. So it's currently on at the Old Rep in Birmingham. I don't know if they're going to be touring anywhere else in the country, but at the Old Rep in Birmingham, the actors that are in it, I definitely recommend going to see it. So yeah, it's a thumbs up from me. So thanks for watching. Join us again some more. Goodbye.